Good morning, friends, and Eid Mubarak to you and all your family members. And it is extremely gratifying to note that we have had a tremendous response for this session that we are hosting today on NRI taxation. Uh, it's always said that there are two certainties in life. One is death, and the other is taxation. And a normal non-resident Indian always had the perception that he is not much affected by the Indian taxation laws. And of late, it is becoming more relevant in terms of Indian taxation. And after so many years, after spending more than 15, 16 years in the GCC region, people still ask the question, do I need to file return? So this is one of the, it starts from there. And then when you start probing the person and find out, does he have a bank account in India? Does he have a house in India? Does he have investment in India? In most cases, it is a yes. And in most cases, there is a liability that there would be a liability to either file returns or whether there is a possibility of getting refunds. And of course, there have been multitude changes that have been happening on the taxation side over the last 4 or 5 years. And many of them have already, to a great extent, are affecting non-resident Indians in a great manner. Last year, one of the amendments that created a sort of big concern or stir in the non-resident community was the change in the residency laws that were being brought about. And there are still questions on that in terms of to what extent will I be taxable? Will my global income be taxable? So this is a perception and confusion that has been going through the minds of non-resident Indians for quite a long time. And in order to address all these issues in terms of a non-resident Indian, what is the perspective that you should have in terms of taxation? What are the compliance requirements and other things that you need to take into account, especially when there is a situation that we have many non-resident Indians who are now going back to India to settle down. So considering all this, I'm sure it is not possible for us to do everything in just 1 hour or so, which is the session we are planning, but we are trying broadly to give you an essence of what NRI taxation is all about and what an average non-resident Indian needs to take care in terms of his perspective. To do that, we have a veteran in the business. I'm extremely proud to introduce Mr. R. Bhupati, who has more than 4 decades of practice as a chartered accountant behind him. He is not only a practicing chartered accountant, but also a mentor, teacher, and guru to many of us who are speaking today, including me. We have all had the privilege of being a student when we were studying for our chartered accountancy course. And he is not only a veteran in terms of taxation, but also in terms of personal taxation and corporate tax. He is a much sought after person. Mr. Bhupati is currently the chairman of Geojit Financial Services, and he was also the past president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in the years 2003-04. He is still associated with many academic forums in terms of his thoughts and views on IFRS and other matters relating to taxation and corporate laws and other issues. And it is a great privilege for us to have you, sir, and I welcome on behalf of Virgil, Geojit, and the clients and the people who are coming to this seminar. We have been doing this seminar for the last 3 months, and this is the 12th such series. Most of our seminars have been addressed to look mostly to our clients and and associates. But this seminar, I'm happy to inform you, as we have broad-based it to include non-clients of Virgil as well. And it is extremely gratifying to note that we have almost reached the full in terms of our Zoom invites. And also this is being telecast live on Facebook, and also our clients and associates from Oman are also part of this session. Before I request Mr. Bhupati to start his session, I would just like to inform the members that that we have disabled the chat box facility. And please, if you have any questions, please put your questions during in the Q&A session. We will try to take as much as possible. We had also given the option of sending your question in advance. So people who had given their questions in advance, say till early Thursday, all those questions have been sent to Mr. Bhupati, and he would be addressing them during his talk, or it would be incorporated during his speech. So please send in your questions, and we will try and take as much as we can after the session is over. I now request Mr. Bhupati to take over, and we all look forward to hear you speak, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnan Ramachandran. Thanks for the opportunity, Mr. Krishnan Ramachandran, Mr. Shamsuddin, other senior members of Burjil Geojit, investors, clients, well-wishers, and friends. It's my pleasure and privilege to connect with all of you. And as Krishnan said, some of my former students also will be there in this webinar. It's a very proud moment for me to get connected through this webinar and share my experience and thoughts on a very complex topic, NRI taxation, compliance, and perspectives. At this point of time, when the entire world is grappling with the situation of the pandemic, COVID-19, some of you would have observed in the last 2 months, the union finance ministers in India, the senior union finance ministers in India, came on webinar and listed out their ambitious projects which they are going to implement, which they are planning to implement during the next 3 to 4 years. Now, I also observe there is a strong will of the government to improve the ease of doing business in India. Many of you would have noticed that there is a positive competition among the states to excel, and they are offering many more incentives for industries to be established in the respective states. Use of technology has improved the compliance in all laws, and COVID-19 has accelerated the process. Therefore, this is the right time to make investments and to grow on your wealth. When you think about investments, I could classify the NRI investors into 3 groups. The portfolio investors, the qualified professional investors, and the third category is people like you who are part of this webinar who make individual investments in shares and units of mutual funds. My presentation is going to cater to the third group of people, individual investors who are investing in shares and units of mutual funds. I would also like to clarify that the focus will be on taxation of individuals, non-resident individuals. I may not touch on the companies doing business in different parts of the globe. That's a different subject by itself. So with this preamble, I would like to share the screen now and F5 is not working. How to make the animation? Yes. Yes, I got it. NRI taxations, perspectives, implications, and compliance. Now, the scope of my presentation, quickly, I will run through what I intend to cover in the next 55 to 60 minutes. The introduction, I just made a quick introduction that you could be reasonably assured of good performance in India in the next 3 to 4 years, and this will be the ideal time for investment. So in this presentation, just like the union ministers have an ambitious program and they listed out the projects, I'm going to list out 8 segments of NRI taxation, which I plan to cover in this webinar. The first one is, there are certain amendments to residential status in the Finance Act 2020. Many of the non-resident are concerned with this, and there's a requirement for clarity in this, so we will try to understand the amendments and in little more in detail so that you will understand the implications of it. Whenever such amendments are made, there will be some issues also connected with the amendments and how it impacts the non-resident Indians. whether there will be net outflow or you will get benefited, and what are the precautions you have to take to overcome the difficulty. These are things which you have to take care of. Taxation of dividends and TDS provisions. All of you are aware that the scheme of taxation of dividends has been changed. Previously, the companies were asked to pay a tax known as a dividend distribution tax. Now it is shifted to the shareholder. What are the implications and what are the associated TDS provisions? The company would be deducting tax at source. What are the associated TDS provisions? We'll discuss. The fourth item is the taxation of income from mutual funds and TDS provisions. So these are the two investments which you make, the shares and mutual funds, units in mutual funds. Both the income we'll consider in detail. Capital gain on transfer of securities, units of mutual funds. When you transfer these units as well as shares, how do you compute your capital gains? And what precautions you may have to take. But just a word of caution here. The area I'm covering is only capital gain on transfer of securities and units, and I have not covered capital gains on transfer of immobile property, which is separate chapter by itself. However, TDS on rent, many of the non-residents do own property in India, and when they own property in India, they receive rent from the tenants. The tenants are expected to deduct tax at source. So what are the provisions connected with the TDS on rent received by non-resident? And also, if the non-resident is going to sell a property, he will be realizing some capital gain. The purchaser of the property is bound to deduct tax at source. How much, when, and within what time, what type of certificate he has to issue, all these things are relevant. The penultimate point, that is seventh point, is many people return to India after staying for a stint of 15, 20, 25 years abroad. They are more concerned at that point of time. There are serious implications when you return to India from the tax angle. So we may have to understand the implications at the time of return to India. Added to this, because this amendment, returning to India has got a different perception. We'll look into that in detail. And the last aspect is procedural compliance and filing of returns. Now, because of technology, so many things are changing very fast in India, and therefore we have to run to keep pace with those changes. The procedural compliance becomes very important. This is an ambitious plan which we have for 55 minutes. Having given you the 8 segments which I want to cover, the first thing I would like to say, the importance of residential status. When I say the importance of residential status, the scope of total income, the total income in India depends upon the residential status. So you must first identify the resident status. Quickly, I will tell you the broad structure of residential status. You must categorize the individual either as a resident or a non-resident. This is the basic classification. I call it a stage 1, resident, non-resident. The next stage is the resident is further classified into ordinary resident and not ordinary resident. So the first one is a categorization, resident and non-resident. And once you identify a resident, then you have to classify them as ordinary resident or not ordinary resident. This is one thing which you have to remember. The scope of total income. Resident status and scope of total income. For ordinarily resident, people like me who are residents of India, the global income is chargeable to tax. Wherever we get the income is chargeable to tax. Non-residents, people like you who are sitting there, income in India only included. Income in the rest of the world is not included. That's why you would observe there was one question from one of your customers of Burjil Geojit. He has stated that he lives in UAE and he has purchased a property in UAE. He is deriving rental income from the property in UAE. Now he has asked a question whether that rental income which he gets from the property in UAE is chargeable to tax in India. Answer is, he is a non-resident of India. The rental income from property in UAE is not chargeable to tax. But if he becomes a resident of India at any point of time, the rental income from the property would be chargeable to tax. Incidentally, I clarified this question. Now we come to the third category, that is not ordinary resident. Not ordinary resident is more or less the same as a non-resident. The income in India is included. In addition to the income in India, income outside India, when it accrues or arises from a business controlled from India or a profession set up in India, is included. So for a not ordinary resident, only this extra income is added. If the income is derived from business which is controlled from India or a profession set up in India, it's included. This is the broad structure of how we have to compute the total income. This, many people who are living abroad are aware of it. And now we will come to the resident status of an individual. Okay? Simple questions. You may have to ask the question. Stage 1, identify resident or non-resident. Categorize them. First question you have to ask. Stay in India during the previous year for 182 days or more. When I use that expression previous year, for ease of understanding, I would ask each one of you to link it with the current financial year, April 20 to March 21. April 20 to March 21, are you going to stay in India for 182 days or more? Is it okay? So if you stay for more 180 days or more, mind you 180 days also is counted, 182nd day or more, he is a resident of India. Or alternatively, if you are not stayed for 182 days, you are stayed for less than 182 days, you may have to ask the next question. 4 years preceding the previous year, that is April 20, 4 years preceding to that, have you stayed for 365 days or more? And during the previous year for 60 days or more. This is the basic structure, very easy. You could identify the dates from the passport of arrival and departure and calculate the number of days. If this is yes, either one of the two questions is answered positively, you are a resident of India. Before I go into the classification of ordinary resident or not ordinary resident, I draw your attention. The number 60, which you see on the screen, is printed in red color. When it is printed in red color, I want your attention there, because they are given some concessions in two situations. The first situation is, in the case of an Indian citizen, please be careful while listening to my sentence, Indian citizen who is leaving India for the purpose of taking up a job outside India, or is leaving India as a member of a crew of an Indian ship, okay? Then that 60 days shall be substituted by 182 days. Let me tell you that this is applicable only for the first year of leaving India, when he leaves India for the first time. Therefore, obviously, for people who are sitting there, who are already there in UAE or different parts of the world, this particular concession is really not applicable. It is only applicable for the first year. But any of your friends, relatives, well-wishers, if they are planning to come to UAE and take up a job, then you could suggest to them, plan your stay in India for less than 182 days, be for less than, in other words, you suggest to them, let them leave India before 28th of September 2020. We are on 1st of August 2020. We got 1 month and 27 days to go. Even if his joining time is on 1st of October, let him come on 27th of September and then take up the job. So this is applicable only for the people who leave India and also Indian citizen. This is what? Indian citizen leaving India as a member of a crew of an Indian ship or for purpose of employment, 60 days shall be substituted by 182 days. Individual is permitted to stay up to 181 days to be treated as a non-resident. This concession is given only for the first year, And that also you cannot go for business. You should go for employment. Then only you can get this benefit. Having explained this, the next concession is somewhere is where there is some amendment made by the Finance Act 2020, which requires our full attention. What is this? All of you are there abroad. And naturally, you have to visit your family and relatives here in India. You always plan visits to India. Now, this concession says, in the case of an Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin, here they added Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin, visiting India, he comes on a visit to India, then that 60 days shall be substituted by, here only you have to watch, by up to March 20, it was 182 days. From April 20 onwards, it has been reduced to 120 days. This is the amendment made by the Finance Act 2020. But it will be reduced for which class of people? It will be reduced for an assessee whose total income in India, excluding the income from foreign sources, exceeds 15 lakhs. So if your income, total income in India is up to 15 lakhs or less than 15 lakhs, then you need not, this reduced number of days is not applicable. You can stay up to 181 days. This is the provision which they have made. Now, I am reproducing it. Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin visiting India, 60 days shall be substituted by 120 days. Finance Act reduced it from 182 to 120 days. If total income, excluding income from foreign sources, exceeds 15 lakhs. This is the amendment which they made, and this is what February 1st, 2020, 12 o'clock, it was announced. And we are able to see the reactions, not in Chennai, not in Bombay, but in Dubai only. The reactions was quite vociferous, quite vocal, naturally so, because people who stay for 120 days, if they become residents of India, then the global income chargeable to tax, it will have a serious impact on their calculations. And that's why they're concerned. And this is, we will now tell you the objectives. Why the finance minister reduced it from 182 to 120. That is coming up in the next slide. What is the objective? Whenever you want to find out the objective of an amendment, you have to go to the memorandum explaining the amendment. This is the explanation given in the budget. The provisions of 182 day stay in India were misused by individuals carrying on substantial economic activities from India and remaining non-resident in perpetuity. Global income is not being subject to tax. The amendment is to avoid such a situation. This is the reason given in the finance bill when they moved this amendment. Let me clarify to you, this change is not really relevant for the employed class of people who are people working in industry, in companies. It's not really relevant. But if somebody has come to UAE 15 years ago, and when he has come 15 years ago, he has started a business there in UAE, and the business is doing reasonably well. Over a period of time, over a period of 10, 15 years time, the business is settled. And this NRI is permitted to come and stay in India up to 181 days on a visit to India. That means literally 6 months in a year. And even while he is in India, he is able to monitor, review, supervise the business activities in UAE. And with technology developing, it has become relatively easier also. So 6 months is too long a period, and we have to reduce it to 120. With this objective, the number of days visits to India was reduced from 182 to 120. Now I'm asking you a question. Is the objective achieved? did what the government want, did they achieve it, or it stands diluted? Just like the last page of a thriller, we should not answer this question now. Wait for it. I'm not going to delay it till the end of the session. Somewhere in the second or third slide from now, you will get the answer for this. So please wait patiently for my view as to whether the objective has to be achieved or not achieved. That was the first amendment in residence. Second amendment in residential status. Far-reaching concept. I'll bring the entire thing on the screen. And then they say, forget about what is there in 6.1, that 182 days, 465, 365 days, forget about it, because it begins with the clause, notwithstanding anything contained in 6.1, overrides it. And this is applicable only to an Indian citizen. The total income in India, excluding income from foreign sources, exceed 15 lakhs. Same condition as we saw there. And he is not liable for tax in any country of residential status because of residential status or domicile. He is not paying tax in any country, any part of the globe. And he happens to be an Indian citizen. Then that Indian citizen who is not a resident of any other country, by virtue of a deeming provision in the Indian income tax law, they say he shall be deemed to be a resident of India. Very deeming fiction itself is fictitious. Now this is going out of bounds. So they are saying, he said, now what is the objective? I'll put it in a small sentence. Objective is the abbreviation which I used, high net worth individuals, not paying tax in any country. Tax laws should not encourage such a situation. They are not paying tax anywhere in the globe. How is it possible? Now, such individuals move to different parts of the globe, and assuming they stay 3 months in each country, 4 countries, they say 3 months each. They are in India for only 90 days, so he is a non-resident of India. He is 90 days in some other country, he is a non-resident of that country. Like that, he is not a resident of any country, and he is not paying tax anywhere in the world. In order to, in such a type of situation, if that high net worth individual happens to be an Indian, he will be, deemed as a resident of India, and his global income will be charged to tax. This was the idea. Again, you will find I used that expression, not liable for tax, in red color. Now there is an interpretation. I would not like any one of you to go for this interpretation, but there is an interpretation. Not liable for tax means the Act should give you a specific exemption. Exemption because you are a resident of that country, it is exempted, then this section shall apply. But in a country like UAE where there is no tax at all on individuals, now that situation will not arise, and hence people will try to bring out an argument. But anyhow, this amendment was introduced in this fashion in the bill, but subsequently it got diluted. So we need not go by this interpretation also. Now we'll go to the next slide, resident status stage 2. You have categorized an individual either as resident or non-resident. Now stage 2 is you must identify whether it's an ordinary resident or a not ordinary resident. I'm going to put it in 2 parts. One is the existing provision and the amendment. What is the existing provision? These 2 things are there already in our law. It is there for many years. An individual will be considered as not ordinary resident in the following 2 situations. It is there for many years. It's not something new. Non-resident of India in 9 out of 10 years preceding the previous year. And I say previous year, April 20 to March 21. Preceding to that, out of the 10 years, are you a non-resident for 9 years? If you are non-resident for 9 out of 10 years, you are a not ordinary resident. Stay in India during the 7 years preceding the previous year for less than 730 days. Either one of the 2 situations, then you are a not ordinary resident. But what is significant and important in the Finance Act 2020. In the bill, when they introduced the amendment, this was not there. When the bill was passed into an act, they brought this one. You remember the previous explanation I told you? Visiting to India, same thing I'm repeating here. Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin having total income, excluding income from foreign sources, exceeding 15 lakhs, visiting India for 120 days, but not exceeding 181 days during the previous year. Then he will be treated as what? He will be treated as a not ordinary resident. Now you could just imagine the implication. Earlier they wanted to make him as a resident. Now they said he becomes a not ordinary resident. If you become a not ordinary resident, then the global income is not chargeable to tax. Only in addition to the Indian income, income derived from business controlled from India or a profession set up in India only is taxable. The global income is not chargeable tax. So they diluted it here by classifying that person who is as a not ordinary resident. Similarly, the Indian citizen, this high net worth individual who is deemed as a resident of India, he will also not be considered as a resident of India, but he will be categorized as a resident but not ordinary resident. When he is a resident but not ordinary resident, again, global income is not subject to tax. Only the income in India plus the income from business controlled from or a profession set up in India is taxable. So now is the time to answer that question which I myself raised. What's the question I asked you? You remember? Is the objective of the amendments in Finance Act achieved? I would say it is partially achieved. They had a different thing in mind, but after the reaction of the people, they listened to it and they diluted it to this extent. But still, implications are far-reaching. I will explain that. But the question which I raised, I've answered it now. They have not achieved their full objective, but somewhere they have achieved at least partly. Having explained this aspect, now we'll come to a small thing which you have to keep in mind. What is income from foreign sources? What is that? Issues. Because while computing your total income, okay, excluding income from foreign sources, they say. So what is that income from foreign sources? There's a definition. Income accruing or arising outside India is a foreign source. That is a foreign source. Excepting income derived from a business controlled in or a profession set up in India. If the business is controlled in or a profession set up in India, then that will not be treated as a foreign source. That will be treated as an Indian source. That's a clarification they are given in the end. I mean, impact of the amendment. I've been telling this for a long time, so I'll quickly capture this. All the conditions, citizen of India or a person of Indian origin. Possibly somewhere in your mind, you will ask me the question. So you are talking person of Indian origin. Is there a definition for it? There's a definition of person of Indian origin, whether the individual himself or either of his parents or any one of his grandparents were born in India or undivided India. So he is a person of Indian origin. Total income, excluding income from foreign sources, exceeds 15 lakhs. Stay in India during the 4 years preceding the previous year exceeds 364 days. Stay in India during the previous year exceeds 119 but less than 182. If all these conditions satisfied, he will be treated as what? He will be treated as a not ordinary resident. And even the deemed resident will be treated as a not ordinary resident. This is the impact of the amendment. Now we will come to 3 situations I'll tell you. What will happen if an individual comes and stays in India for 115 days? Indian citizen visiting India, stay in India for 115 days. He's a non-resident. Less than 120 days is a non-resident. 125 days, more than 120, but less than 182 is a not ordinary resident. 185 days is if he is a non-resident in 9 out of 10 years, he is a not ordinary resident. If an individual has stayed in India during the 7 years preceding the previous year for less than 730 days, he is a not ordinary resident. If both these conditions are not fulfilled, then he becomes an ordinary resident of India. This, in summary, is the amendment. Now we have to consider, and this situation is dynamic. Every year it will keep changing depending upon the number of days stay in India. Now, I have to just take a minute of time and see there's a definition of non-resident. Non-resident means an individual who is not a resident of India. Can I equate not ordinary resident as non-resident? No. There are only 3 situations where the Act itself specifically provides that a not ordinary resident can be considered as a non-resident. Other provisions, non-resident is separate, not ordinary resident is separate. That's what I have captured here. Non-resident means a person who is not a resident of India and includes not ordinary resident only for 3 distinct sections. Forget about the sections, that's not relevant for you. For all other purposes of Income Tax Act, non-resident will not include not ordinary resident. Have this in mind. So once you stay in India for 120 days and you lose the character of non-resident and become not ordinary resident, what are the implications? And from your time you have started at 11 o'clock, you're about to have your lunch. The points which I am now going to share with you may reduce your appetite. So I don't want you to lose your appetite, but I have to explain to you the implications, issues. Issue number 1. Now, once you cease to be a non-resident and you are categorized as a not ordinary resident, you have NRE accounts in India. You get interest on the NRE accounts, whether the interest is chargeable to tax. This is a question. It is right now exempted. But once you lose the character of non-resident and you become a not ordinary resident, whether the interest on NRE account will be chargeable to tax? Answer is exemption is available. Exemption is not denied because in that section, the character of the residential status is not resident or non-resident. They use the expression person resident outside India as per FEMA. So you continue to be a person resident outside India as per FEMA. Therefore, you continue to get the interest on NRE account. This is also one of the questions which was put by the customers. Incidentally, I have clarified. Exemption, interest on FCNR account. Now, when you are a non-resident, you open the FCNR account. Now you cease to be a non-resident. You stayed in India for 120 days or 120 or 125 days. Then what happens is whether the interest on FCNR is chargeable to tax. Again, the answer is no, it is not chargeable to tax. It continues to be exempted. The reason is that exemption section is applicable to non-residents and not ordinary resident. Even if you become a not ordinary resident, you could continue to get that interest as exemption. Refer to that particular section under 1015 of the Income Tax Act, you will come to know. But here we have a problem. Not many people are aware of this. There is something known as International Financial Service Center. In India, it is there only in the state of Gujarat. International Financial Service Center. If somebody establishes a unit in that IFSC and they take a foreign currency loan from any one of you, you have a 1 crore foreign currency loan, you give it to a unit in IFSC, and the unit starts paying you interest. Under the existing law, the interest is exempted if you are a non-resident. Now what happens? Because you stayed for 120 days, you cease to be a non-resident, you are a not ordinary resident. If you get some interest from units in IFSC, earlier it was exempted up to March 20. From April 20 to March 21 onwards, that interest will be chargeable to tax if you stay in India by 120 to 180. So this is a very serious, those of you who have such units in IFSC will have to be a little careful. This is issue number 1 and issue number 2. A very ticklish situation here. This, I think they have not visualized this. They may give some clarification. We need to seek a clarification. I could tell it simply, the chicken or the egg story, which comes first. Now you see here, if you want to determine the total income, you require residential status, because total income depends on residential status. If you want to find out the residential status, you need the total income. As I told you, chicken or egg. Which one will do first? This is the problem. I could explain it in a different way also. A man of unsound mind or an individual of unsound mind, if he wants to get married, he has to be cured of his sickness. And he will get cured of his sickness only when he gets married. Which one is first is a major issue. So it's a catch-22 situation. We need some clarification on this. To illustrate, supposing the non-resident from a unit in IFSC. Now, if he is having 14 lakhs 50,000 interest, and his other income in India is say 1 lakh. 1450 plus 1 lakh, he crosses 15. Whether you will give the exemption and say is less than 15 lakhs, or you will not give the exemption and say it's more than 15 lakhs. This is a small issue which possibly they will clarify as we proceed. Now we will come to the major impact. Major impact if you cease to be a non-resident. There are many types of income where the non-resident is paying concessional tax under 115A. If you are a non-resident, you don't pay taxes at the regular rates, you pay tax at concessional rates on certain types of income. And once you become a not ordinary resident, these exemptions are, these concessional tax rates are not applicable to you. And as I list out the things, you will understand how serious it is. First one is dividend from domestic companies. From April 20 onwards, the company will not pay tax, you have to pay the tax. And when you receive dividends from domestic companies in India, the flat rate of tax is 20%, plus surcharge and cess, of course. And then I have also added subject to DTAA, Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement. Dividends from domestic company, 20%. And if the DTA says less than 20%, that rate will apply. Here I have to clarify something more. Once DTA is applicable, and for your information, the Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement between India and UAE says that dividends from domestic companies in India, a resident of Dubai, or he will be able to, he has to pay tax only at a concessional rate of 10%, not even 20%. So you get a further concession, 10%. Not only that, once you come under the DTA, it is only 10% flat. There is no surcharge. Next slide, you know the steep surcharge you could avoid in case you come under the DTA. But if you cease to be a non-resident, become a not resident, you will be charged to tax at the slab rates. And obviously you are in the highest slab rate of 30%. Highest slab rate of 30% plus surcharge plus cess as compared to 10% tax. You see it is phenomenal. And many of the non-residents are investing in shares of domestic companies in India and they are receiving dividends. So one has to be careful to retain the status of non-resident and not to dilute it due to any reason. Income from mutual funds, it's 20% flat rate. Here also, if you cease to be a non-resident, you will go under the regular slab rates. Interest received from government or Indian concern on monies borrowed, 20%. And you see here, interest received from infrastructure bonds. As non-resident, you are invested in infrastructure bonds. It is chargeable to tax at concessional rate of 5%. If you cease to be a non-resident and become a not all-resident, you go under the slab rates. That's interest on rupee denominated bonds. And finally, interest on or dividends from specified bonds or GDRs or long-term capital gain on transfer of such bonds. So in all these types of income, you pay a flat rate. But if you cease to be a non-resident, then what will happen is you will you cease to be a non-resident, you will lose all these concession rates and charge to tax delivery rates. Now, this will be the rate of surcharge for you. 50 lakhs to 1 crore is 10%, 1 crore to 2 lakhs is 15%, 2 crores to 5 lakhs is 25 crores. The last one, there's a mistake. It's above 5 crores, not 5 crores to 10 crores. Above 5 crores, it is 37%. So steep surcharge is there. So one has to be careful. So after explaining all these things, I'll just skip this part of it because it's a double tax. Okay, I can tell you this also. You have to quickly, I will tell you. Previously, you are allowed to stay in India up to 181 days. So the remaining year, you could stay any part of the world. That's okay. The possibility of being a resident in more than one country was very remote, very rare situation. But now it is reduced to 120. Now, if I stay for 120 days, I become a resident of India. If I stay for 120 days in Dubai, I become a resident of Dubai. And to apply the DTA provisions, I have to find out which country I am resident of. I am resident of Dubai, I am resident of India. So in such cases where you are a resident of two countries, what will happen is, you have to first identify that to apply DTA. Then you have to apply the tiebreaker rule. Tiebreaker rule, they give you a list of criteria. Where do you have your permanent home? If you have permanent home in both the places, then the next question they ask, where your economic ties are more stronger. If you have economic ties in both the countries, then where you have got a habitual abode. If you have got habitual abode in both the countries, then they go by citizenship. Like this, they're given some criteria. Now what happens is, because they reduce the number of days to 120, more number of such cases will come to apply the tiebreaker rule. Ultimately, you will prove that you are a resident of Dubai because everything is there, connections are there. But still, there is a possibility of the related compliance issues. The income tax department may ask you questions, you have to answer that. Unnecessary, correspondence will have to be. This is impact number 2. Last impact is reporting of foreign assets by residents. Quickly, I'll run through this. Also applicable to not ordinary resident. Once you become a not ordinary resident, you have to report all these foreign assets while filing your income tax return. So long as you are a non-resident, you need not do it. But once you become a resident or not ordinary resident, particulars, details of foreign bank accounts, very important, foreign bank accounts, country code, name, address, bank name mentioned in the account, and peak balance. Then details of financial interest entry, if you hold some shares in a country, country code, name and address of the entity, total investment. Details of immovable property, country code, name and address of the property, total investment. Other assets, country code, nature of asset, total investment. Details of accounts in which assessee has a signing authority. It's not in your name, but you got a signing authority. Name and address of the institution, name mentioned in the account, and peak balance investment. If you are a non-resident, you need not report any of these things. Once you lose the character of non-resident, become a not all resident, you have to report. You see the card. Now I will ask you the question. If earlier you are enjoying a holiday in India up to 181 days, would you like to continue to enjoy a holiday in India up to 181 days, or would you like to restrict it to 119 days? It's a question you have to decide after listening to the implications of these amendments. That is the first two segments which I have covered. Now, quickly on the taxation of dividends. Taxation of dividends, as I told you, dividend paid declared by domestic companies. There was a question which was put by one of the customers. If the dividend is declared before 1st April 2020, but received by the shareholder after 31st March 2020, then is it taxable for the shareholder? I would like to clarify is if the date of declaration is important. If the dividend is declared before 1st April 2020, then the company has to pay the dividend distribution tax and the shareholder need not pay tax. If the dividend is declared on or after 1st April 2020, then the company is not paying tax, only the shareholder is paying the tax. Not applicable on dividends declared after. Dividend distribution tax is not applicable on dividends declared after 31/3/20. It will now be taxable in the hands of the shareholders. As I told you, for non-resident, taxable at flat rate plus surcharge and cess under 115A, it is further subjected to concessional rates in DTA. At least in UAE, the DTA rate of dividend taxable is 10%. In Saudi, the double taxation avoidance agreement in India and Saudi says it will be chargeable to tax at 5%. Now, supposing a person, an Indian who is staying in Saudi, and he comes and stays in India for 121 days, he is getting some dividend income from companies. If he is a non-resident, he pays tax at 5%. If he is a not all resident, he pays tax at the regular slab rates plus surcharge and cess. You could see the implications. TDS at 20% surcharge rate, they'll do the TDS at that rate, 20% plus surcharge, they will deduct it, or the rate specified in the DTA. So that's what I said, compliance, what you should do to get the concessional rate under DTA. I will explain it in the next slide for you. Procedure for claiming concessional TDS rates in DTA. What is the procedure? I would say the procedure has been simplified to a great extent, excepting for one area, which you have to be careful about. And you have to take some trouble to get the concessional rate of tax. What is it? The following documents must be submitted. Self-attested PAN card, which you can easily do. Tax residence certificate. You are a resident of UAE, you must get tax residence certificate. Self-declaration in Form 10F. Self-declaration beneficial ownership, that you are the beneficial owner of the shares. All these 4 things you can give, excepting the second one. Second one, in some of the countries, individuals are facing difficulty to get the tax residency certificate. That is the only difficult thing. You have to initiate the process a little earlier, get the tax residence certificate. And in Form 10F, they are asking you a question. Your income tax account number, they ask, just like we have PAN in India, they'll ask your income tax account number in that country. In some countries, they don't have an income tax number. Then Form 10F clarifies that either you give the income tax number or the unique number by which you are identified in that country, you give that number, and that should be sufficient. If you submit all these forms, and mind you, if A company is declaring dividend, you must send all these things to A company. If B company is declaring dividend, you must send it to B company. Therefore, there is some effort which is required from your end. Those of you who are shareholders, now you would have started receiving emails from companies when the AGM is going to be held. They are now declaring dividends. Now they are sending. You send all, if you want the DTA benefits, you send all these documents and we will consider the, and they also set a date. You have to give it before this date. Each company, depending upon its AGM, they give a date. You have to give before that date. And if you submit it before the date, you can claim the concessional rate of tax. Option to file return. You need not file a return if your income consists only of dividend income and the TDS is made on such income. Naturally, whatever tax you have to pay is deducted source, you need not file a return. But there's a practical difficulty if you choose not to file. What's the practical difficulty? If you have substantial income from other sources, the income from dividends, say a few crores of rupees, and you're not paying, you're not filing returns. This will be a trigger point for them to send a notice inquiring as to why you have not filed a return. So it's easier to file a return and say, yes, we have got this benefit. So if you exercise the option not to file a return, there could be some questions. I was discussing this practical difficulty with a senior officer of the department. He explained to me how far and how quickly they will implement this. I'm not too sure. But if they do it, then this practical difficulty could be avoided. What is that? They say they have found an algorithm wherein they'll run it on the system. And when they run it on the system, only when the income TDS is not made or situations like this, they will trigger and ask you for questions for not filing returns. Otherwise, they may not ask. The technology is now being sophisticated. So if they do it, it's fine. Otherwise, you run the risk of not filing a return. Taxation of mutual funds is more or less similar like dividends. Previously, the mutual funds were paying tax. Now they are shifted to, for a non-resident, it is 20% plus surcharge and cess under 115A. TDS 20% surcharge, nothing difficult. Same thing. Now the question which you have to ask is, if they are distributing income, they will deduct tax at 20%. If they are not distributing income, but you are selling the units are redeemed, you get a capital gains. Whether on the capital gains also, they will deduct tax at source on redemption of equity-oriented funds. This is because it's not chargeable to tax. If it is not chargeable to tax, with it. Now the answer to this question is, if you are a resident of India, they said they are not going to deduct tax at source on the capital gains. But if you are non-resident of India, they will compute the capital gains, and on the capital gains, they will deduct tax at source, because the clarification they are given is only for residents. But however, if it's a long-term unit, then it's exempted and the need to deduct tax at source will not arise. Only if it is chargeable to tax, they will deduct tax at source. Otherwise, they will not deduct tax at source. Now we come to the capital gain on transfer of securities. Krishnan, you have to tell me at what point of time we have to stop.
Yes, sir, please carry on, sir. For some other, we have another 15-20 minutes. We can go on.
15 days. This only will take time. The others will go a little faster.
Sure.
You must classify the assets first into long-term and short-term. And classification assets, I will quickly run through. These assets held not more than 12 months be short-term. So 12 months, less than 12 months is short-term. More than 12 months is long-term. What are the assets? Securities listed on the stock exchange, units of equity-oriented funds, units of business trust, zero coupon bonds. The holding period is only 12 months. Up to 12 months, it is short-term. More than 12 months, it's long-term. Following assets will be short-term if held for not more than 24 months. Shares in unlisted companies and immovable properties. This also was done recently, where 24 months classification. Any other asset will be short-term if held for not more than 36 months. Up to 36 months is short-term, above 36 months, because the tax treatment for long-term and short-term is totally different. Now, taxability of it. Short-term capital gain at regular slab rates, long-term capital gain at 20% plus surcharge and cess. Even for short-term capital gains, you will get the surcharge and cess. Now we come to the real aspect. Taxability of short-term capital gain on transfer of listed shares and units of equity-oriented funds. Listed shares and units of equity-oriented funds. Not on debt funds, it's not debt funds, it's only on equity-oriented funds. Now what they say is, the purchase and sales transaction must be subject to STT, Security Transaction Tax. But there are situations where the purchase transaction will not be liable for STT. And if it is not liable for STT, whether you lose the exemption. It is here only, I would like to draw your attention to a notification. And the notification says that there are certain circumstances where the purchase transaction, if it is not subject to STT, still you will continue to get the exemption. That is an important point. That notification number 60 of 2018. Supposing you are acquiring the shares by way of a court order. The court says, yes, you are entitled for this number of shares. By court order, you get the shares. Naturally, at the time of acquiring the shares through a court order, you are not paying security transaction shares tax on the purchase of the shares. And after 1 year or 2 years, you sell the shares. Then what happens is the exemption you are trying to claim, the income tax officer says that at the time of purchase, you are not liable for STT, therefore I'm going to deny the exemption. No, read that notification. Similarly, if you are buying an undertaking as a whole, and the undertaking has got shares in companies, you have got the shares. On the shares, you wouldn't have paid any STT. Even that is exempted if you refer to the circular notification you get. And the best part of it is the short-term capital gain on listed shares as well as equity-oriented funds is chargeable to tax as a concessional rate of 15% plus surcharge. Then you be careful. They have said the maximum surcharge will be only 15%. Even if your income crosses 5 crores, 10 crores, whereas we said 37% is the surcharge. But in case of short-term capital gain on transfer of listed shares and equity-oriented funds, the maximum surcharge is only 15%. This is the treatment for short-term capital gain. Same thing is there for long-term capital gain, but with small exception. So the first two conditions are same. But long-term capital gain in excess of 1 lakh, up to 1 lakh, it's not chargeable tax. In excess of 1 lakh is taxable at a concessional rate of 10%. And here also the maximum surcharge is 15%. So if it is a long-term capital gain on transfer of listed shares and units of equity-oriented funds, up to 1 lakh, you need not pay tax. Above 1 lakh, 10% surcharge, 10% plus surcharge, the maximum of surcharge cannot exceed 15%. Immediately people started asking questions. Whether 1 lakh limit is say separately for shares and another 1 lakh for equity oriented funds, or 1 lakh both put together. Answer is 1 lakh both put together. If it exceeds 1 lakh, then 10% tax plus surcharge, and maximum surcharge cannot exceed 15%. Computation of long term, how to compute the long term capital gains. This will take some amount of time. I'll just quickly run through this. You are all aware, up to March 18, okay, the entire capital gains was not chargeable to tax. Long-term capital gains on sale of securities, listed shares as well as units of equity-oriented funds was not chargeable to tax. The popular section is, many of you would know, is 1038. If you sell shares long-term, and if you shares listed shares, if you like units of equity-oriented funds, whatever is the long-term capital gain was completely exempted up to 31st March 18. If you have sold it before 31st March 18, there is no tax at all. 1st of February 18, when they introduced the finance bill, they said the long-term capital gain will be chargeable to tax at a flat rate of 20% if it exceeds 1 lakh. So logically what they said, if the appreciation up to 31st January, I'll try to cut short this number of slides by giving you a summary of it. Whatever is the appreciation of the shares from the date you acquired it in 1988, and now if you up to January 18, whatever is the appreciation, 31st January 18. Why 31st January 18? Because the budget was introduced on 1st February 18. Cut-off date is 31st January 18. Whatever is the appreciation is not chargeable to tax. They call it as grandfathering provision. Similarly, if you have purchased something before January 18, and if there is a drop in value, the loss also will not be considered. This is someone's substance of it. You compute the capital gain, and it's a long-term capital gain. If it exceeds 1 lakh, you pay tax at, this is what I say. You get above 1 lakh, 10% surcharge, maximum surcharge of 15%. Tax rate is only 15%, 10%. Hope I have clarified this issue. I will be skipping the next 2-3 slides for want of time but the summary of it I have explained to you. The appreciation up to 31st January is not chargeable to tax. The loss, if any, incurred up to 31st January also will be ignored. And if you get an appreciation from 31st January to the date of sale, if you're selling it today, that appreciation, if it exceeds 1 lakh, then on the excess over 1 lakh, you pay tax at 10% and the surcharge, maximum surcharge of 10%. So I'm just skipping this to come to the, TDS on rent. Because I am more concerned about return to India. At the time of return to India, I have listed out 6 points. I would like to spend time on that. Tenant making payment of rent to non-resident, there's an obligation to deduct tax at source at 30%. Because the tenant will not know at what slab rates you are. So he will simply say, I will deduct at the maximum rate, and he will remit it. So if you want the tenant to deduct tax at lower rates, then you could make an online application for lower deduction of tax. Convince the officer. Now it's all done online. And they're fairly fast as far as the online transaction, and as far as rent is concerned. They give a certificate saying you deduct tax at source of 5%, 8%, 15%, whatever is, they will arrive at the percentage and tell you. So the tenant you can give that certificate to the tenant, and the tenant will deduct tax at such lower rates. Tax will be deducted by tenant at the rate specified in the certificate. Then there is a little bit of follow-up. Tenant making the payment has to obtain TAN. See, invariably, tenants are not aware of the procedure. You may have to tell them, get the TAN number. Without TAN, you cannot deduct tax at source on a payment to a non-resident and remit it. If I'm paying to a resident of India, I could do it without TAN. But if I'm paying to a non-resident, I require a TAN number, ask them to apply and get it, pay the tax, and you'll get the credit. Little bit of follow-up from the non-resident is continuously monitor with the tenant whether he is paying the tax deducted and he is filing the returns on time. This is a practical issue. Sometimes the tenant deduct the tax and they don't remit it, or they remit it but they don't file the returns, and then you don't get the credit for it. If you don't get the credit, unnecessarily you have to pay the tax out of your pocket. So that's the reason why we ask them to. And you have to apply for this lower deductions at the beginning of the year itself. And nowadays they are accepting it at the last week of the financial year itself. And you could get the certificate in the month of April itself, so that from April onwards, the lower deduction tax will apply. But you have to take this timely action, then only you will get the lower deduction of tax. Similar is the process on the capital gains. I told you on capital gains also, they will deduct tax at source at the applicable rates on the consideration paid. Mind you, if it is a sale of a property, if it's sale of equity-oriented funds or shares in companies, they will compute the capital gains. If it's long-term, they will not deduct. If it's short-term, they will deduct. But if it is on other assets, they will deduct tax at source. Supposing you're selling a property, the purchaser is purchasing. A non-resident is selling the property and the purchaser is making the purchase. Then the purchaser has to deduct tax at source. What rates? You will not know. So you will deduct, if the asset is held for more than 36 months, you will deduct tax at source 20%. If you want lower deduction, you have to go to the officer, online application. But here it's relatively difficult to convince the officers, because wherever there is doubts, they hold the certificates, they don't issue the certificates. Possibly going forward, they will also relax these conditions. But as of date, to get a lower deduction certificate for the sale of property is a little cumbersome and difficult. Now we come to this issue. I have captured 6 different areas or points which you have to consider at the time of return. 1. On return to India, what is your residential status? After you return to India, if you have been outside India continuously for 10 years and you are non-resident, you return to India, the first 2 years in India, you will be a not ordinary resident. Subsequent to that, when you continue to stay in India, you will become resident and ordinary resident. So you could continue the status of not ordinarily resident for 2 years after arrival. There was a question put by one of the customers. I've come back to India on 15th of July. He was very specific, 15th July 2020. That means 15 days back. And retired now, I'm here. What will be my residential status? For the year ended March 21, you will be a not all resident, provided you are a non-resident in 9 out of 10 years. And you will be a non-resident for the next year, and not all resident for the next year also, 2021. Thereafterwards, you will become a resident of India, resident and all resident. Taxability of interest on NRE account. This is the major problem at the time of return to India. I have already clarified for you that NRE account status is person resident outside India as per FEMA. The moment you come back to India for permanent settlement, you lose the character or you lose the status of person resident outside India. You will be treated as a resident of India. And then the interest on that, it is no more interest on NRE account. It will be treated as an RO account. And the interest on that from that date of return to India technically will be chargeable to tax. And within what time you have to report to the bank? There is no time frame fixed, but normally we suggest to them within 30 days of coming back to India for permanent settlement, inform the bank that I have come back to India for permanent settlement, and they'll reclassify the account from external account to ordinary account. And from that day onwards, they will start deducting tax at source on the interest. This is the most crucial aspect. Many people ask this question, whether interest on NRE account after returning to India is chargeable to tax or exempted. Taxability of interest on FCNR account. As I told you, interest on FCNR account is not chargeable to tax so long as he is either a non-resident or not ordinary resident. After return to India, he is a not ordinary resident for 2 consecutive years. If he is a not ordinary resident, then interest on FCNR account continues to exempted for first 2 years of return to India. Thereafter, it will be chargeable to tax. Therefore, the idea will come to you before returning to India. Can I convert my NRE account into FCNR account and then come to India? At least for the 2 years after I come back to India, I need not pay tax on the interest on the FCNR account. Pointers for decision making to invest in FCNR. Now the pointers, what are the points on which you should take a decision? Calculate the interest on FCNR account. The interest on NR account is higher. Interest on FCNR account is relatively less. 2 years, what's the differential interest you lose? Find out the tax implication. If the tax is more, put it in FCNR. If after paying the tax, the return is more, then you convert into ordinary account. So you have to do a calculation depending upon the exact amount you have and the slab rate you are in, then we could make a decision. I'm not saying in all cases convert into FCNR, in all cases, but in FCNR you are protected against the fluctuation of the foreign currency. If you put in dollars, if the dollar gains, you get the benefit of it also. So this is about planning of date of return to India. As I told you, the moment you come back to India, you lose the status of person resident outside India. Therefore, preferably, fag end of the year if you come, for financial year if you come, then 2 full years you could take the FCNR benefit and get the concessions. So that is the only thing. So you could, if it is possible to plan, and if it is not possible to plan, leave it at that stage. So if you are given an option, I would suggest that the last week of March, you can return to India. Retention of bank accounts and investment outside India after returning to India. Yes, you could retain your bank accounts, investments outside India. Particularly people take LIC policies and they cannot close the LIC policy and come. The LIC policy will mature after 3-4 years after they return to India. If it's like that, then what happens is you could retain that, but you must disclose this in your income tax returns subsequently after returning, so that on maturity, when you get the money from overseas, it will be easier for you to explain. Lastly, termination benefits received after returning to India. What of some individuals, what they do is, they work in a company and the company says, you go back to India, I will send you the termination benefits. You have to take a little bit of precautions. You have an account outside India, you can retain account. Ask your employer to credit that money to your account outside India. Okay, and then you bring it to India. If you directly receive it in India, then there will be a possibility that income received in India and charging you to tax. Take a little bit of precaution and then you could get the benefit of it. Filing of returns quickly, obligation to file ITR. One of the customers had asked this question. Is there an obligation, non-resident, I have income in India, is there an obligation to file a return? Yes, there is an obligation to file a return if your taxable income in India exceeds the basic exemption limit of 2.5 lakhs. If your taxable income exceeds 2.5 lakhs, you have to file a return. That's absolutely required. But the person who asked me the question added a rider to it. He says that my income does not exceed the taxable limit, but there is a tax deducted source of some of the income which I get. Should I file a return to get a refund? Answer is, if you want to get the refund, you have to file a return and get a refund. And if you have the refund and if you don't file a return, the system generates a issue. This TDS is there, but this person has not filed a return. They send an automatically generated notice as to why you have not filed a return. Therefore, if there is a refund, the suggestion would be to file a return and get a refund, if there is a TDS. I have explained this options given to SSC not to file ITRs in certain cases. If you exercise the option, there is a risk factor with the limited. Otherwise, you are prepared to meet that consequences, then you could continue to exercise the option not to file it. Like I told you, dividend 115A. If you are having only dividend income, whatever may be the dividend income, and tax is deducted source 20%. So you need not file a return. There's an option given to you file a return. But it will trigger a point as to why you are not filed a return, and they'll ask you a question. In order to overcome this, you could file the return. Now, large scale they are doing this, linking information from external databases. They are linked the GST database with this income tax portal. They are linking the security transactions, specified financial transactions, SFT, with this. So, a lot of information will get auto-populated into the income tax return. For example, if you sell shares and securities, here afterwards it will not be necessary for you to fill it up. Once you put your PAN number, automatically whatever shares and units you have transferred during the year will be captured from that particular portal to your portal and added. The option of you disclosing the income is not there, it is auto-filled. That's what it comes at next one. Additional information 26 AS. Next one is auto-filling of income tax return. Now, the major change which they are bringing is 26 AS. When I say 26 AS, the TDS is given in 26 AS. But in this 26 AS, they are going to add a few more items. What are the items they're going to add? They're going to add any tax proceedings, demand on you, pending, any matter which is pending against you, whatever if you have any correspondence of foreign country tax authority, and if the income tax department feels it is necessary in the interest of the revenue to include it in the 26 AS, they are going to include it in the 26 AS. And if you go to a banker for a loan, the banker may ask you a copy of the 26 AS. And if you give a copy of 26 AS and you have a lot of demand from the income tax department, your loan for bank loan will not be entertained. So 26 AS is going to be a very important document for any financial institution to look into, to see how compliant you are with the tax provisions. So auto-filling of returns, I told you, is, many of you are aware that there is a section called 80TTB, where it says interest on fixed deposits banks and SP account is exempted, is allowed as reduction to the extent of 50,000. But if you see the explanation below that section, it's for a senior citizen, not for all. For a senior citizen, if the interest exceeds 50, interest up to 50,000 is exempted. Now what happens here is, explanation states that this is applicable only to a resident of India. It is not applicable to non-resident. So once you fill up non-resident of India as a return status, residential status, and if you by mistake claim this 80TTB, you are not eligible, but by mistake you claim. Up to last year it was passed, but today when you fill it in the ITR, it will not be accepted. It will say you are not eligible for this deduction. So system cases, so mistakes will be minimized and they will do accordingly. So these are the various things which are coming up. And sorry if I've been too fast in my anxiety to cover what I intended to cover. I've been running through these slides, but some of the items are repetitive, so I just went through it fast. Before I conclude, there's one very disturbing or a difficult question, I would say difficult question to answer at this point of time, raised by people in India and outside India. There is an individual who has been outside India for many years, 40 years, now come back to India, and he is a resident of India. Now once he is a resident of India, he is an Indian citizen and he has come back to India. The question they are asking is whether he will be classified as a not ordinary resident, because that section which they have said is an Indian citizen who is not a resident in any other country, or if you they are saying, asking a question, his income in India is less than 15 lakhs. It does not cross 15 lakhs. Majority of his income is still global income. Whether he will be liable for income tax in India on the global income, whether the global income will be subject to income tax in India. That's the question they are asking. I could give only my view on this at this point of time. My view on this is that explanation one will come if you are visiting India. Once you come back to India for permanent settlement, that explanation is not applicable to you. And the deemed resident station is also applicable when you are not a resident of any country. Now you have come back to India and a resident of India. For you to claim saying that you have got income in India only up to less than 15 lakhs, and your global income is substantial and I will not pay tax on the global income, to my mind is not acceptable. If that argument, due to any reason, they find is acceptable, you could be rest assured there will be a clarification in the law stating that this interpretation is not acceptable and they will try to read it. That's not the intention, and that they will not allow to continue. With this, I will conclude and I will leave the floor to Krishnan to take us through to some of the question and answers. Okay, thank you, Krishnan. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I must say that it was indeed an engrossing session. As a matter of fact, I got comments in the Q&A and private chat saying it was like really watching a thriller movie, especially when you were explaining the residential status part of the for the NRI. Thank you, sir. And for want of time, I will quickly ask a few questions that have come, because I think you have covered most of the points that people have been repetitively raising. And if there are any specific questions, we will try and answer, or we will bounce it back to you for your viewpoint and then get back to these people.
First question to answer those questions.
Yes, sir. First question is that on account of COVID, there are a number of Indian ex-residents of UAE and other non-residents who are stuck in India. So is there any specific exemption going to be given, because they've already crossed the 120 day, going to be crossed, or if they have been in April, they would have already crossed the 120-day limit. So what is your view, and how should they be taking this point up, sir?
Krishnan, there is a clarification on this issue. If people have come to India before 22nd March, when the lockdown was announced for COVID,
Yes.
and they are unable to return to their country because of non-availability of flight or because they are quarantined, the number of days they are forced to stay in India for these two reasons will not be reckoned for computing the number of days. The 60 days or 180 days, it will not be taken into account. This clarification they have given only for the year ended 31st March 2020. But in the same clarification, they have added one small paragraph. The paragraph they added for the current year, April 20 to March 21. People would have come somewhere in April and they are not able to go back. And if they are stuck here because of non-availability of flights or because of quarantine, very specific reasons they are given, the number of days they are forced to stay in India will not be covered. A similar announcement will be given by the board. They have promised. They promised in the earlier notification they will send a similar clarification for the current year. Why they are not able to do it right now is because when the epidemics is going to end, they are not aware.
Yes, correct.
So they'll have to wait for it and then they will do the announcement. But they have promised that they will give it. I think they will give it because everybody knows the difficulty.
And thank you very much. I think that was a much needed clarification. Many people were asking. The second question, sir, is the topic thing is on timeline. Now, what is the revised date for filing of returns? I think it is now changed. If you can highlight on that.
That is yesterday, 28th of July, there was a clarification. The clarification is for the year ended March 19. Year ended March 19, you should have filed your return by July 19. It got extended. It got extended. And they said you have to do it up to 31st July 2020 was the last date. Therefore, yesterday, they are given further extension to it, saying that it is extended up to 30th September 2020. This extension of date is for filing returns for the year ended 31st March 19, assessment year 1920.
Correct.
Now, incidental question came up there. Is this extension of time applicable only to returns filed for the first time, or it's also applicable to revised returns? Because supposing you made a mistake, can you submit a revised return? Answer is yes, it is also applicable for the revised returns. So after listening to this, and if you feel for March 19, you already filed the return and you have made some mistakes, you need to correct it. You got an extended time up to 30th September to correct it. So this is a clarification they given day for yesterday, which has come. For the current year, March 20, for the year ended March 20, by 31st July is the normal deadline, but they have extended it up to 30th November 2020. 30th November 2020 for the current year. But one rider, one clarification I would like to give you is that if your tax liability, self-assessment tax, the final tax which you have to pay is above 1 lakh, you ought to have paid it before 31st July. If you are not paid it by 31st July, you can file the return up to 30th November. That is not an issue. But since you are not paid a self-assessment tax, less than 1 lakh self-assessment tax, they are ignoring it. Above 1 lakh you pay. If you are not paying it, they will not consider as a default, but they levy interest from August to November or whenever you are filing a return. That is, the interest is applicable only for those cases where the self-assessment tax is above 1 lakh. The small taxpayers, they don't want to touch. So that is the clarification.
Thank you very much, sir. So there's one more question which is a little out of subject, maybe, is in terms of wealth tax and applicability. I mean, I think it's outside the scope, but quickly.
Sorry, so tell me, if it's possible, I'll answer. Otherwise, I'll come back to you with the clarification.
So wealth tax, is it applicable for people to file returns, or for NRIs, is it applicable?
There is nothing like wealth tax today. Wealth tax itself is repealed. In the sense, it is not there. You need not pay any wealth tax today. The concept of wealth tax has been done away with. So if the person is asking wealth tax, then there is no wealth tax at all. Whether you are a resident or non-resident, there's no need to file wealth tax returns. Okay. Maybe he's got something else when he says wealth tax.
Yeah, I will find out and come back to you, sir. Sir, quick question. One more question. If somebody is using the benefit of DTA between India and UAE,
okay, and
after he files the return, there is a refund scenario. He is still eligible to get the refund scenario, or is it sort of it will be considered as a tax payable that is on DTA?
The person who made the payment has deducted extra tax, and therefore there's a refund situation.
Yes. Yes.
And you are eligible for DTA. You benefit. You are eligible. You comply with all the requirements. Okay. They will pass an order, and they will convince themselves that you are complying with the DTA provisions, and they will compute the tax liability. If your TDS or the tax paid by you is more, they have to refund it. My immediate answer to your question is, they cannot withhold the refund. They have to give you the refund. They could question whether you are eligible for DTA or not eligible for DTA. That they could question. But once you convince them that you are eligible for DTA, then you get the benefit.
I think at this point, I would like to say thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful session, because I think we have already overshot our allotted time. I would now request Mr. Shamsuddin, Director of Virgil Geojit Financial Services, to formally propose a vote of thanks. And from my own behalf, also, it's a great pleasure to have interacted with you. It was like school days again, back college, attending your class sessions again, especially on the residence. I think you still not have lost your touch in terms of explaining that in a manner that only you can do so, sir. Thank you very much. I will now request Mr. Shamsuddin to formally.
The only thing I would like to say is, those of you who visited Singapore, and if you go to a department store, you will find a placard in the department store which will say that if you are happy with us, tell others. If not, tell us. So the people who are participated in this webinar, if you are happy with the content as well as what is shared with you, you could share it with others. If you need further clarifications, come back to Krishnan and we will address those issues. Thank you very much. Sorry I extended the time limit, because all things were quite relevant and important.
Absolutely, sir. Mr. Shamsuddin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bhupaji, and all the members attended this 10th webinar of Virgil Geojit Securities. And today we are fortunate to have such a large number. Before starting the program, the 500 limit is already covered. And almost all the time, I was seeing more than 480 people attending the webinar. So it shows the importance of today's webinar. In fact, people were asking us to have a session like what you had done, and you covered almost all the points people were asking to us. And that is a reason there is no much questions, because all the presentation covered almost all the questions of the attendees. I express on behalf of all the attendees and Virgil Geojit our sincere thanks for giving us such a wonderful session. And all the members attended here. We have to consider today is a holiday, Eid holiday, as well as a Saturday and morning. Still, we got such a large number. We express our sincere thanks all the attendees of this function. We are announcing again almost alternate week or sometime every Saturday. We are planning similar session. We hope in the future also we will be getting such a good number of attendees. Once again, thank you on behalf of all the attendees to my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Bhupaji, because you have for us, you have double importance. First of all, you are the veteran and more than 40 years experience, institutes, present so many occasions, and you have large number of followers and students here. Secondly, you are the chairman of our company, but Geojit Financial Service. Once again, thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you very much, Shamsuddin. Nice to meet
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
In the last 25 years, the returns on various financial asset classes like bank deposit, gold, and real estate have multiplied several times. But there are a few select investments in the Indian capital markets that have had the potential to appreciate exponentially over 100 times. If you had known this at the right time, you would have taken the right investment decision, which is precisely why you need an expert's validated advice when it comes to investing. Welcome to Burjeel, one of the few SCA-approved financial intermediaries in UAE. We are wealth builders, guiding customers since 2001. We have serviced over thousands of them till date, and today we cater to large segments across investor groups. This speaks about our enormous goodwill and their undiluted trust. And we have earned that trust by telling, not selling. We educate you on the investment opportunities that are ideal for you. We then help you make an informed decision, impartial and unbiased, keeping your long-term goals in mind. And with us, everything is long-term, be it commitment, relationships, or success. We offer comprehensive insights across a wide range of products through a holistic approach. We ask you the most important questions, the answers to which will help you focus on your investment objectives. For example, you work for over 30 years. Are you saving enough for the next 30 years? For life goals like children's education, your daughter's wedding, or your retirement. Think about it. You work hard to earn your money. Does your money work hard enough for you? Burjeel, let's build your future. Come, let's talk.